The Biden administration set an ambitious and clear goal for vaccine distribution, stuck to it, made it reality, and then set the goal higher. If only the same thing were happening with the president's vow on reopening schools during the pandemic. Instead, the public has received conflicting and waffling messages from both the White House and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Even as the government claims that the top priority has to be getting most students back on campus as soon as possible, under the best possible scenario right now that won't happen at most schools for 2 months or so, when the traditional school year is almost over. The message has been downright labyrinthine. In December, a newly elected Biden declared that he would return most students to in-person classrooms within 100 days of his presidency. Before he took office, though, the goal had already been watered down to a majority of K-8 schools, with high schools left out of the equation, a reasonable change, given that the virus is more easily caught and passed along by teenagers than by younger children. Still, the overall goal seemed to take a major step forward February 3, when CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky said that vaccination of teachers is not a prerequisite for safe reopening of schools, based on an ever larger body of data. But 2 days later, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki pulled back from that statement, saying that Walensky had been giving her personal opinion, not an official one. That sure wasn't how it sounded when Walensky spoke at an official White House briefing. The following week, Psaki also redefined the goal, saying that schools would be considered open if they did some in-person teaching at least 1 day a week. Hybrid education, a mix of in-person and remote, might be necessary in many areas, but 1 day a week is not what most people would consider a reopening. And last Friday, the CDC released its official guidance for reopening based on coronavirus infection rates. It showed that in 90% of the nation, rates are considered too high for grades above elementary to bring students back on campus. Elementary schools were considered safe for hybrid reopening if they followed strict safety protocols. Yet in many of these same areas, schools already are open and operating safely. At the same time, the guidance followed Walensky's statement that schools could reopen before teachers had been vaccinated. Yet in an interview this week, Vice President Kamala Harris would say only that vaccinating teachers should be a priority, without backing the CDC's science-based decision that vaccination was not necessary for safe reopening. Are we confused yet? Add to this Biden's statement this week that Psaki's statements were a mistake in the communication. He went back to his earlier pledge of reopening most K-8 schools 5 days a week by the 100th day of his term. And Dr.